We have reached the final season preview episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. Alongside Thomas Dunn, I'm Zach Farmer, and we are at the end, teams 11 and 12, as we will be previewing the WCC, Santa Clara and Portland in this episode. We will get to Thomas's Broncos and, of course, the Portland Pilots in just a bit. But the one we are also going to talk about a little bit on the release of the KenPom rankings, which did come out just the other day. Gonzaga leading the way at 8, St. Mary's 55, San Francisco 84, Santa Clara 105, Seattle maybe the shocker at 116, Oregon State, Washington State, LMU, Pacific, San Diego, Pepperdine, and Portland round out the rest. I mean, Seattle was the one that kind of popped out at me as being maybe a little bit of a surprise in their initial KenPom placement. Was there anything else that kind of like surprised you seeing the release of the first KenPom of the year?
So I'm in agreement to start with about just kind of how pesky Seattle is, because we're both pretty bullish on Seattle. I think we look at the work that Coach Victor has really put in across the time in the WAC and eventually this turnover into the WCC, and we're like, there's a lot to like and a lot to work with. So I'm equally kind of as like almost pleasantly surprised that people have recognized that and putting Seattle as high as they are on KenPom. I don't necessarily know that I have like I think probably my other biggest surprise is St. Mary's as low as they are. And that's just relative to their standard and relative to their expectation. I understand that we have like more questions about the Gales roster than we've had in quite some time, but I do think they're mutually exclusive things to where we say, okay, there are more questions about St. Mary's, but are they 55th ranked St. Mary's? I don't think so. Randy Bennett, the proof's in the pudding. I don't need to belabor all the accolades that he has and the reasons why we should believe in what Randy Bennett's selling. So at least for me, just St. Mary's not getting the benefit of the doubt, whereas other programs are. Like, you can't tell me that there's a 47 team difference between Gonzaga and St. Mary's.
I mean, I always have to think about like with KenPom is like the math is the math. Like I can't argue numbers and the way they're just put together or whatnot.
Yeah.
But the fact that like you have 47 spots between the Zags and the Gales, like there are not 47 teams in between those two squads. But also like I think the one that kind of surprised me a bit was as much hype as USF has gotten where they are at 84. That seemed low to me. I mean, you think about where they've been over the last few years, like they're kind of like always right in that 60 to 70 range. So the 84 seemed a bit low to me. But hey, again, these are preseason rankings. These will all change. These are based off of years of metrics and like years of data and what we've seen, what we're going to see this coming year. So it's never like all too much to kind of think too hard on any of this. But maybe again, like Seattle's maybe the one where it's like, oh, that actually maybe a little bit more positive note on the Red Hawks than that might actually agree with what a lot of us are starting to think about them. Also, Pacific actually at 168, it's not too shabby for the Pacific Tigers.
Look at the range that nearby Washington State LMU. That is not far away. That, if you're thinking of it like a tunnel, like you're going through the Bay Bridge tunnels, like they're in sight. They're absolutely in sight.
Yeah, so not too shabby of like some work with some of these squads, but let's dive in. Let's get to the previews here, and we're going to start with your Santa Clara Broncos. This is a team that has won 20 or more games in 4 straight seasons, 5 of the last 6. Herb Sendek entering year 10 at the head of the Santa Clara program. They were in the NIT. They made to the second round. There's obviously some good pieces coming back for this squad, and a lot of intrigue with some of the talent. And of course, I feel like the entire preview, the entire outlook has changed because of the addition of one guy, and that's Thierry Darlan.
Some may say that. When you just mentioned that year 10 of Herb Sendek, time is flying. It almost doesn't feel that way. It's people are starting to say Herb Sendek, oh, the Santa Clara coach, not Herb Sendek, oh, the ASU coach, or Herb Sendek, the NC. Like it's Herb Sendek, Santa Clara Bronco head coach right there. So that's just to start with. It feels crazy to say that year 10 of the Sendek era. And for me, Santa Clara is a very intriguing team, and just I understand that I went to Santa Clara and I understand like the preconceived bias notions that can come with, but at least for me, I'm a big prove it guy, and at least from my perspective, like they lost a lot. Like you lost a lot of guys. Christoph Tilly gone, Carlos Stewart gone, Adama Alpha Ball gone, Tyree Bryant gone. And you have guys who are coming in from kind of from Big Ten programs and big tier programs that didn't play. And are you trying to unearth the next Brandon Pajimski? Because that's certainly what it seems like right now. And then you have other returners who are coming back. Are they ready for that spotlight? There are some guys who I think would do better with good opportunity. The guy that comes to mind for me is Brenton Napper. He's someone who's very smart, very in tune with the offense, very fundamentally sound. What can he do with a bigger role? That's something that I'm very intrigued by. So for me, Santa Clara, they're probably one of the more intriguing teams in the WCC. And I say that from a perspective of we don't really know what we're going to get with the Broncos this year. And that's really the one thing I want to see. How do they establish consistency over everything? Because sometimes when the jump shots weren't falling, the bottom fell out. And then sometimes they'd get out physical and then the bottom would fall out then. So for me, how can they find a way to stay even keeled as the development process takes shape this season?
I mean, thinking about that, because you're right. Like there was a lot of almost like ride or die with the 3-point shot. Like if they were shooting it well, this team was going to play really well. If they were not shooting it well, it might be a rough night. But looking at the construction of this roster, I don't think that they're going to have that ability like we've seen in years past, the last few years. They don't look the part of a team that's going to just drain threes. Like they're not going to hit 15, 18 threes in a given night with this squad. They're going to have to do it maybe a little bit more of a traditional way. They're going to have to be a little bit grittier, I think, than we've seen in years past. And at the very least, I think you do have a few guys who kind of play right into that grittiness. You have Elijah Mahi coming back and being that leader for this squad. You mentioned Brenton Napper being the guy who can lead this offense and has always kind of been in that backup role, is going to be looked upon to take on more leadership. You look at someone like Jake Ensminger, someone who also has kind of been in that mold. I expect him to take a big leap. We know like there's a lot. We see the potential with Ensminger. I think we just haven't got to see it in a lot of ways because he's been sitting behind Tilly, sitting behind a lot of the other veterans on this squad. And we haven't seen it be consistent enough. So this is the year where I think he's going to get a lot of opportunity early to show that consistency, to prove that he can be a little bit more of that everyday starter. But then you mentioned some of the other guys that are coming in. Like, tell me if this sounds familiar. Finalist for State of Illinois Mr. Basketball, 3-star recruit. What basic 59% shooter, 39% from three. It's like 4 assists, almost 5 assists, 17 points. It feels like I'm describing Brandon Pajemski, but no, I'm not. I am describing one of the recruits coming in, Bradley Longcore the third. When I was starting to look at the profile, look at everything, I'm like, is this Pods 2.0?
Yeah, like there's so many different interesting profiles, and you mentioned Longcore right there. I think some of the other profiles are looking at Chris Todjo coming in from Iowa. Like that's a guy who's looking for opportunity. You look at Garrick Normand, Michigan State, different types of opportunity. Look at that. I really want to peel back that Jake Ensminger curtain, because if there was an award for most improved player, if Jake Ensminger can consistently make his jump shot, like last year kind of escaped him compared to the small volume from 2 years ago. If he nails a shot, I would always put him up for like most improved player, because he's kind of like the glue in some respects that holds Santa Clara together. Someone who's willing to do the dirty work, crash the board, someone just do a little bit of everything, kind of almost as a point forward for a very short amount of time in a given game for Santa Clara. And at least for me, it's like, how does Herb Sendek push the right buttons to get the best version of this team? And I think that's really the intriguing process, because then you have another guy coming off a redshirt, Christian Hammond, who had I'd say a very solid end to let me make sure I have my years correct here. The 23-24 season had a pretty solid end. It was kind of emerging, and then redshirted last year. What does he look like? Alan Graves. I've heard a lot about him in practice, saying that he's very dang good, but he redshirted last year. So how does that all kind of play out? Who are some of those guys that step up? And in kind of almost a comparison to the Gonzaga in our last episode, they have a lot of good trying to get into great elite. Santa Clara has a lot of unproven who can be good and then maybe eventually great. So for me, there's so many different profiles with this Broncos team. I think probably maybe a lot more volatility in recent years is probably the biggest question that I have for them, but definitely some interesting pieces of the puzzle and ones that I think Broncos fans should be equally as intrigued by, but not necessarily be blinding lights. Yes, this team's going to win the conference championship.
Yeah, I mean, intrigue has to be the word for the Santa Clara team, at least in the preseason, because as you mentioned, the lack of tape, the lack of game experience that this group has doesn't really give you a whole lot to work with to try to predict what they're going to be. You have a lot of guys. You mentioned Norman, not a whole lot of playing time at Michigan State. You look at Tajo, a little bit of playing time at Iowa, but not terribly consistent. Cochran coming in as a freshman, Longcore coming in as a freshman. Francis Chukwudibelu, also freshman coming in, highly recruited freshman, 6'10" center out of Texas. Like, this is a kid who's going to, I think, turn a lot of heads early on, and is going to get opportunity to get a lot of minutes at that center spot. There's so many unknowns about this Santa Clara team, but the one thing that we have seen is that we know that Herb Sendek can develop these guys.
Yeah,
we have seen it countless times when you look at up and down the roster, not just the NBA guys. And this is not just Pods, not just some of the others. This is, you're looking at something that for a team that is going to get it from up and down the roster. The development that we're going to see out of Jake Ensminger, a development that we're going to see out of Elijah Mahi. I'm probably more excited about Elijah Mahi than most everybody in the WCC, because like, he does so many of the little things right. He distributes, he shoots, he crashes the boards. He's like a top level talent that does all the dirty work. And like, now he has the opportunity to, like, no, you can be the main guy for this squad. And I think he needs to be a little bit more of that main guy, alongside maybe the one guy who's maybe has the most proof to what he is going to be, and that's Thierry Darlan, coming from the G League to join Santa Clara, which I know a lot of people have been like throwing around, like, how in the hell was this even possible that we now have actual professionals coming back to play in college sports? But regardless of the fact that it shouldn't have happened, maybe whatever the case, it happened. He's going to be playing for the Broncos, and he alongside Mahi is going to be an absolute nightmare for anyone in the WCC. This guy is 6'8", 6'8" wing, 7'3" wingspan. He can play the 2, the 3, the 4. He was averaging double digits, shooting 45% in the G League this past year. The combination of Darlan and Mahi could end up being the best 1-2 punch in the WCC if everything goes right.
See, you heard it here first, guys. Get your newspapers with the headlines. The NCAA is rigging it for Santa Clara, guys. That is what's happening, and you are all bearing witness. But yeah, to be quite honest with you, had Darlan not gotten with the Broncos, and I think that's obviously was a very big possibility before that happened, you're just saying, okay, this is what the team is. For me, my biggest question was going to be scoring guards. Like, where does the firepower come from Santa Clara? Because I would classify Elijah Mahi as a 3. He's a forward that kind of can dabble in a little bit of everything, handled the ball a little well, spot up shooting, took on some pretty beastly defensive assignments in terms of people who were guarding him. The one thing for me that I really want to see from him this year is, can he finish at the rim? Too many times he smoked layups last year, and I think it's such a nitpicky thing, but you notice it over the course of time, especially in close games, especially when you're a star player. More eyes are on you. There's more scrutiny that's on you, and at least for me, that's a little thing for me that I can see. If those are layups that turn into dunks, if those are things where he can just be a little more crisp at the rim as he's trying to navigate through traffic, that's the one thing from Elijah Mahi. He can stay consistent. Can he finish at the rim? He does that. I think he's well on his way to potentially all WCC first team this year. And you look at that combining with Thierry Darlan. I think Darlan's explosiveness, I think, is going to be the key to unlocking the Santa Clara team, because you kind of look at the way that Carlos Stewart, both in his first stint and his comeback year last year, when you're head first bowling to the rim, that's a good thing. But can you be kind of like chaotically in control, so to speak? So can Thierry Darlan be chaotically in control, find a way to get to the rim, and then potentially draw in extra defenders and kick it out to a guy like Napper in the corner? So the balance of being on ball, off the ball, and then turning that around into the right level of explosiveness for me, I think would unlock the Santa Clara team. And that's the part where I have the biggest pause of how does this come together?
I mean, does Darlan joining the WCC, like, because this is a bona fide professional, someone who's played in the G League, is like, and he has a lot of the physical tools, is he automatically the most explosive, the most dynamic player in the WCC? Because I mean, the short list is going to be Grant Foster, Tyrone Riley. Like, you're looking at kind of like that crew, and like Darlan almost immediately jumps into that, if not ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you really argue it. That's the one thing for me. It's like the best part of we don't know, and I understand that there's G League tape. The best part of I don't know is that you don't know the answer in a good way, and you also don't know the answer in the bad way either. So like, yes, at face value, a professional is coming to play NCAA Division I college basketball in the West Coast Conference. How does that translate? Because I think you're going to have other guys who are, and I'm looking at players on the upper tier teams in the conference that are going to say, well, I want to lock you up like that. They're going to take that as a personal challenge when they walk into each other's building saying, you think you're so good that you can drop down to this level? No, I'm going to go lock you up, limit you to have a bad stream night. You're going to go 2 of 11 on my watch and basically have a miserable night. So for me, it's like, yes, how does Darlan adapt? But how do the other people adapt with it? Because I think, at least for me, I'm going to see a lot more matchups where they're going to be like, yeah, I want to take you out of the game and you alone and see what the rest of your team can do. So I want to see how Darlan navigates his first sense of adversity, because there will be adversity in the sense of in the season. So how does he matriculate that process over from different levels of basketball?
I think it's also going to be a matter of like, there's got to be a level of, and maybe there was this from the beginning of humility coming back to this level, because again, it's like, to your point, everyone's kind of going to have a little bit of a target on his back because this is an actual G leaguer who dropped down a level, and he had to come down for a reason. This wasn't just like a random like happening. Like, there had to be a legitimate reason as to why he took the demotion. And I don't know, like maybe the NIL was better there than his G League contract, and it might have been as simple as that. But there has to be a reason why on a basketball front that he makes this return.
Yeah.
Running into, like, talking with Jalen Williams, talking to Brandon Pajemski, running into Keyshawn Justice, like one of the Santa Clara guys. Maybe that's how this really all started, as far as like the possibility of him coming back, because I don't think any of us would have even thought of the idea of like, oh yeah, a G leaguer will come back and play college.
Nah.
And especially for Santa Clara.
Nah. Yeah, no, that was really never in my window, never on my cards. Then it kind of just popped into my plate saying, yeah, by the way, this is probably going to happen this week. I'm like, okay. But yeah, I like that you pointed to the lineage of the development process within the Santa Clara program. And I think that's really all the proof that was needed in terms of making that decision, because yes, you want to fit in an institution, but the ultimate goal is the same. You want to go to the NBA. You want to be up and not necessarily floating around the G League, but you don't want to be stuck there. You want to make sure that you have a trajectory and a path. And look at the path that Santa Clara has given individuals over the course of the last few seasons. The proof's in the pudding there. And I think there's no doubt about what the development process is under Herb Sendek in regards to that. And maybe, who knows, is he the guy that unlocks the team that contends for a conference championship? Who knows? At least that's not necessarily what I'm expecting. But I think when you consider all the different possibilities that have been coming to fruition over the last month, I think you can't rule it out. But that's one where you have to strike while the iron's hot, and especially of how does that work if he's tasked to run the offense, be more on the ball if Napper's in foul trouble or whatever else is happening, because Santa Clara, they got a lot of unproven size. That is probably the other big thing for me, is what does center look like? Because Buki Aboye is probably the de facto starter, and he was third string last year, would come in and basically immediately foul. So that's another area where I'm like, okay, well, like we're going to get on the coaster one way or the other.
Yeah. And I mean, with the schedule, they're not going to have a whole lot of time to really figure things out. They're going to have to hit the ground running. You look at the first 3 Division One games that are on the slate, McNeese, Xavier, and Nevada, you're going to have to pick it up pretty quickly on what these rotations are going to look like, what the comfortability each other is going to have with their new teammates, what the returners are going to look like with kind of with their new sets of roles. They'll get a little bit of a reprieve after that. Idaho State, Louisiana, of course. I mean, this is Santa Clara. It's like you can't sleep on any of these games.
North Dakota State guys.
It's these games we have seen it in the past, and they've snipped them in the heels and cost them potential at-large consideration in the last few years. Now, I'm not saying that this team is going to be in that conversation, but if they come out of the gates, hypothetical, get McNeese, they go to Xavier, win at Xavier, they beat Nevada, they clear through Idaho State, Louisiana, St. Louis comes next. They get to the Acrisure and they are sitting at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If there's 6-0 going into the Acrisure and at the very least split, I think we're starting to at least have the conversation that the Santa Clara team may be onto something.
I would entertain that possibility had I expect that to happen. I quite frankly don't expect that to happen. And that's no shade on my guys, because I'm always going to believe in them, but I'm a realist over a sunshine pumper more than anything. And I think the one thing is we talk about those losses, and I think it stretches both from non-conference and conference losses over the last few years where don't make it matter. Okay. Like the reason we're bringing up these games is because you keep losing those games. So at Portland, at home to USD, you mentioned North Dakota State last year. Don't make it matter. Just let that off to the side. If you can continue to take care of business like you're supposed to, then we will not make it matter as we are right now in this discussion. So for me, it's those building blocks. Take care of business like you're expected to. Expectations are not for you to have a winning season. Expectations are not for you to have just a winning conference record. Expectations are not just for you to have a flashy upset win and then kind of erase some of that goodwill in other games. Expectations are to be a consistent 20-plus win program that is now on the verge of contending for conference championships. And yes, this is probably a roster that's more challenged to accomplish that feat in quite some time, but that doesn't mean I'm going to let them off the hook in doing so, because if the standard is what you say it is and the lineage is what it has been over the last few years, this team's going to have to go out and prove it. And they have a long mountain to climb. Can they do it? I think there's obviously a world where they can, but is it going to be a lot more challenging than in years past? That I am also in the same boat of.
Looking at their start of WCC play, I do think that there is at least a track where they can kind of hit the ground running a little bit. They started off at Oregon State, but then they're doing the Oregon swing at Oregon State, at Portland. Then they're back home for Pepperdine, San Diego before they see Gonzaga. And then it's LMU and Pacific following that. There's a lot of winnable games that should be winnable games in that first 7-game stretch. Obviously, you look at Gonzaga, at Oregon State being the two toughest of those matchups. But Santa Clara went up to Oregon State, won at Oregon State, so it's not like something that they haven't done. And you think about, the Gonzaga game, last opportunity to win in Spokane, and you won in Spokane last year.
That did happen. That will not be stricken from the record. But Zach, I hate to be that guy for you, and I hate to open that wound. Yep, I'm going to do it.
Yep. Other way around.
I wish Santa Clara won at historic Gill Coliseum last year. That unfortunately that was a trend for the USF Dons that they got to accomplish as opposed to the Broncos. But yeah, no, I look at the opening slate of this conference schedule, entirely gettable, very much open on the possibility of being 4-0. I would personally expect 3-1. But that I'm not the one who plays the game. But at least in my case, can Santa Clara not get bitten from the side? Can they not get dragged into a bar fight and kind of let other teams dictate the pace? I look at last year's game at LMU. That's the one that sticks out to me, where it's you do so much good, and then it just kind of gets unwoven a little bit right there. I'm not saying that you have to beat St. Mary's twice, but you can't be getting blown out at home by 30 points. I think it was 2 years in a row now that they've been blown out by 30 points at home. So those two things right there, and I know that the garbage time score last year doesn't dictate that, but just in general, like you can't be relative to who you are, and that requires consistency both on the top end and low end.
if there's a positive to the St. Mary's opportunity this time around, is that you don't have to face Gonzaga right before you play St. Mary's.
Well, that was fun.
It's Pacific this time around.
Yeah, no, it's good because Pacific is a good matchup for Santa Clara and has been, according to Dave Smart. He's like, that's a team we just have not figured out. And the Tigers trying to face up against the Broncos. I look at the stretch towards the end of the season, the last 4 games: home against Gonzaga, at USF, at St. Mary's, home against Oregon State, and who knows what the Beavers are by that point. But just in general, I mean, Santa Clara, you minding your P's and Q's is not just going for an upset, and that's what.
Hey, don't discount Seattle as the beginning of that stretch.
That's true. Like, look at me, like getting on my high horse thinking that 4th place is a shoo-in when it's not. It really isn't. And that's the one thing where I think probably it's going to be the biggest point of contention with my own fan base, so to speak. Like the window, I think, is pretty tight for this team. To be, the margin of error is pretty slim. I think the range of where they finish is pretty tight. Like when I look at things and the way things are falling, it's so easy. And I'm trying to think of the way to articulate the meme of where the guy's coming up from like a gopher hole and like grabs you into it. Can Santa Clara avoid being grabbed into the middle of the pack bar fight? And that's the one thing I really want to see this year. Are they entirely capable? Yes. And I know I'm, going back and forth with like playing both sides of the fence here, but that's really what it is when you're almost the box of chocolates team in the WCC this year. You don't really know what you're going to get, and you have to really figure it out fast because there's no time for the weary, and especially in a conference that is very high powered, high profile, the one that has given you thorns in the side, both from the top end of the conference to the bottom end of the conference. There's no days off.
So again, you mentioned, we're talking about it like we just don't know about the Santa Clara team. But the one thing I can say is that this team has been, regardless of who's been on this roster the last 4 or 5 years, there's a consistency that Herb Sendek has ran this program with, and it has yielded results.
Yep.
And that is the one thing that you can say, and as consistency matters. And yes, we always can talk about Gonzaga, St. Mary's, and the consistency that they have had at the very top. USF has also developed that level of consistency, and now we're starting to see Santa Clara develop that level of consistency. And this is where, again, you talk about like the small window of where they probably finish. I think that is true. I think we're looking somewhere, but in my opinion, they're between 4th and 6th. That's probably the small window where Santa Clara ends up. I cannot see them dropping below 6th. Like if they end up 7th, they end up 8th, the bottom has completely fallen out for the Santa Clara team. This feels like if everything goes right, 4th is where they'll be. If things go sideways a little bit, that's when Oregon State can take advantage. That's when Seattle can take advantage. And that's who could potentially leapfrog the Broncos in that middle of the pack.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. My window is really 4th to 5th, so we're not too terribly far off one another. And at least for me, you think of it in the sense of graduating to the next year. I've talked about it with different teams, going from the lower pack to the middle of the pack. For Santa Clara, they want to be on the level of, I would say they're fighting within the tier of USF and Santa Clara. I think they're their own tier, at least for the past few years, and maybe USF's trying to graduate to the next one. Santa Clara, it's getting to be the time to graduate into that next tier, but I just don't think this is the year that it's going to happen. And you look at the timeline now, it's going to be this 4th season. By the end of it, it'll be the 4th season removed of having like Jalen Williams, if I have my timelines correct here. Because then you had Pods, you had Adama Alpha Ball
for 2 years.
Yeah, for 2 years. And now this is going to be season number 4 where you don't have Jalen Williams anymore. So it's like you want the tangible progress to be noted because that's kind of where it all started and where it all began. And it's like, okay, like if you sideswipe to 6th spot, then it's like, well, did we really capitalize on what's going on here? So that's for me, that's the rock and the hard place for Santa Clara this year. And yeah, 4th and 5th is where I'm going to stand. 4th in terms of its ceiling, 5th in terms of its floor. I feel like that's where Santa Clara is going to be this year, and I'm happy to be proven wrong by them. But I think the big thing is and you've noted this with St. Mary's, there are just so many different questions about these top end teams this year that I'd say the range is somewhat bigger than in years past. But these teams have had chances to prove themselves. They have had consistency over these years. It's just a matter of how much you think they can reach into the well another time.
Yeah, so time will tell with the Broncos. We will probably end up talking with Coach Sendek and some of the guys down at Media Day next week. So we're going to get a little bit more info on the Santa Clara team and really kind of like get a little bit more info on what we should expect to see from this Broncos squad. Now, to round out the final part of our WCC previews, last but not least, the Portland Pilots. And with Portland, this is a team that, like we talk about consistency, and I was looking through the tenure of Shante Leggins, who is now in his 5th season with the Pilots. There actually has been consistency. From the first year was 6th place, and then each of the last 3 seasons they have been the 8th place team, regardless of how many teams have been in the league. They have been slotted at that 8th spot. And last year, toward the end of the year, they started to play really well. Were getting a little bit healthier. They started to kind of put it together. They won 5 of the last 7 before the WCC tournament. The Pilots have unfortunately been on this kind of waiver early on. It doesn't look good. It has looked ugly at times in the non-conference, although like they should have beaten Oregon last year. It's like, but thinking about, this Portland team also lost a ton in the offseason. I feel like it feels like it's every year. It's like Portland lost a ton of guys. And it's true again this year. Just looking at the names, Delano, Doble, Rapp, Jones, Dangan, Mosic, McKinnon, every year, these Pilots have had to just do full reset.
When does it end? And that's really the biggest doom and gloom point with Portland. Like right now, you can only reset to the well and find diamonds in the rough so many times. And I think that's the biggest point of struggle that we have with this roster. It's just like, I understand that they bring in the highest scoring talent off St. Francis and Riley Parker, but it's where else is the scoring going to come from? Where's the defense going to come from? I don't know that I don't even have the armchair solutions for Shante Leggins on paper right now, because it just doesn't seem like there's a viable path for Portland to even be in the tier of USD and Pacific this year. I think that's like the biggest struggle point, because you could look at Pepperdine's run that they went on last year in the conference tournament and kind of see itself how it formed and all that. I think this year, I'm trying to envision something good for the Pilots, and I'm just having a really tough time in doing so. Maybe you can talk me off this ledge.
I'm looking at some of the other transfers. You bring up Riley Parker, 13 points per game at St. Francis. That's probably the biggest get that they were able to bring in. Nearly 40% shooter from 3. So they did address some of the 3-point shooting that they were going to be missing. They do bring a couple teammates from Trinity Valley College, Cameron Williams and Garrett Knuckles, both 10 points per game scorers. Cameron Williams also averaging 5 rebounds a game. You do get a little bit of that. James O'Donnell, who transferred from USF to Portland, is someone who, honestly, I'm a little surprised that he made that jump going from the Dons to the Pilots, but that's someone I think who has a lot of upside down low, the 6'10 forward. He's going to give you a lot. I think he's going to give you a lot of good, solid minutes. But to your point, I keep looking up and down this roster, and it's hard to find the points. Jay Alvarez coming over from Ryder, a 10-point per game score, but I'm like, all right, I have 10 point, 10 point, 10 point, 10 point, 10 point. I won ball. I just don't. I'm having a harder time this year with this Portland team. You know what? I keep looking at this team, and it's reminding me a lot of where San Diego was a year ago, when they were gutted for the 2nd straight year. And to your point, sometimes there's a break, and it's a breaking point. You just can't recover fast enough to be able to add in all the pieces that you may have wanted. And that's where San Diego was a year ago. When you think about, you lose Kevin Patton Jr., you lose some of their key players, really all their key players from 2 seasons ago. And last year they just felt gutted. KJ Bradley was really the And he and maybe Santiago Truitt were like the two bright spots last year for San Diego, and we know how that ended. It that they ended up finishing in last. They were a complete shell of what they were in year one with Steve Lavin. But it did finally come around. Of course, that was because NIL, the facilities, whatnot, as we got to talk with Coach Lavin about that. That feels like that's where Portland needs to get better. And like, I don't know if there's a part of this season where that can get better with the pieces they have, the talent they have. I mean, they do bring back Micah Baloo, who I did really like his scrappiness and the way he was able to play. They do bring back Jermaine Balasager Webb, um, who shot 64% last season. But you, I on the everyday, when I think about this team, this one's a hard pill to swallow because these pilots are like, even I try to be as optimistic as I can about these teams. This is the first time I'm like, when I stare at a team like this one's tough.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in agreement, and I think the good clarification to say is like there's only so much Shante Leggins can do. We haven't had the chance to talk with him about like what I think the trial center starting to show its age a little bit relative to the rest of the WCC. We haven't really picked his brain on like what the NIL standing is for the Pilots, and obviously you're in a basketball city. Portland is no slouch when it comes to basketball spirit, basketball identity, and kind of like the wherewithal that sport can take within that town. So it's not like they're in the doldrums or out in the middle of remote nowhere. For me, it's such a big struggle to convince myself that things are going to go well for this Pilots team. And like you mentioned, the comparison with USD last year, I think that's pretty apt. And I think I'm intrigued to see if Shante gets the chance to redeem himself, because when you're doing this, when we expect this to happen and it happening in year 5, it's like you're reaching the point of where it's just been consistently dipping down, and you feel like the identity from year 1, where they were a very sparky offensive team that could bomb threes and really get into track meets with you. It's like, now what do you do? And like, what do you do? What have you done for me lately? What do you do now? And when I look at what are you going to do for me in the future in terms of this season, it's like, I can't expect a whole lot of anything, to be quite honest.
Now, the one thing I will say, looking at their schedule, they're going to at least have opportunities to figure things out. They're not going to be, unlike some lower tier, mid-major, low major teams who end up just with like the toughest possible schedule because it's payday. This is a schedule that, you know what, Portland could probably make look halfway decent. Arkansas Pine Bluff, UC Davis, at Wyoming. Obviously, that will be a tough one. They do have Fullerton, Northern Colorado, St. Thomas, which we know we've mentioned actually is probably one of the tougher games on their schedule. Long Beach, at Stanford, Kent State. They're going to be back at Oregon in middle of December, and then UC Santa Barbara. Like, so they actually do have a little bit of like a ramp to get to at least try to figure some things out, to find a bit of a rhythm before they see the tougher teams in their non-conference schedule. I mean, the St. Thomas, Stanford, Santa Barbara, Aiden Mahaney's Santa Barbara squad, and Oregon. I mean, like those, like, I mean, you could probably just like hang the L's right now on those games.
We could have the Redeem team at Matthew Knight Arena in Eugene. Come on now.
That is true. We could indeed see that team, like a Portland team that can, because we know Oregon teams, and you know, like they usually don't even wake up until about the middle of February. So like the middle of December might just be the right opportunity to catch the Ducks in hibernation mode. But I think this is going to be a tough year for Portland, and I don't like saying that because I like Shante. I want this Portland program to do well. It's like, this is just looking at what is left of this squad, and I hope they prove me wrong. I really do hope they prove me wrong, but this one it's going to take some time for, I think, this squad to really figure something out and maybe steal some wins toward the end of WCC play, because it does seem like that's always kind of like what happens with Portland is early on it looks bad, but toward the end they start to play a lot better with Shantae. Again, like that's the one thing. Shantae's teams do get better as the season goes on.
Yeah, and I like Shantae. I think he's one of the best personalities in terms of coaches in the whole WCC. And we didn't mention that, but they do have 2 non-D1 games that I would hope that they could take care of business of against Willamette and Lewis and Clark. So hopefully that. But there are some gettable games on the schedule. CSU Fullerton hasn't been good in a few seasons. You kind of looking to see if what the mix of UC Davis is going to be. Kent State in a similar fashion as well. So for me, it's like, how can you find those building blocks consistently? Because once you get into conference play, it's not a pretty start. Washington State, Santa Clara, St. Mary's, USF. Those are the opening 4 games for the Pilots. And I look at that, I'm like, oh dear. Like somebody it's going to be sent help pretty quick. So I understand the growing pains that this Portland team is going to go through. I understand kind of the plight that Shantae Leggins and the fight that he has to go up and deal with in terms of where Portland stands within the NIL world, within the revenue share world, and kind of how everything, so to speak, with the facilities across the WCC. But like we mentioned, it's hard to find a path, and you don't really get that many excuses, because at some point the record is the record, and that you are what your record says you are.
Well, on that happy note about where,
come on.
I mean, thinking about like this Portland team, I think we're like this team, they're 11th, 12th place team. They and Pepperdine are probably playing to stay out the cellar. And that's unfortunately, I think, what we're going to see from this team. So I'm not going to belabor or try to stretch this out for too long. Like, this is a team that's
it is what it is. I'm in agreement. I'm in agreement with you. The 12th is the floor, 11th is the ceiling. Like you mentioned, we'll hope they prove us wrong, and we'll just have to wait and find out.
All right, now going into next week, so we are wrapped up with our season previews. We are done at talking about the hypotheticals. We're done. We're only a few weeks away from actual games taking place. We're already starting to see scrimmages taking place. Gonzaga had their crazies in the kennel, so actual basketball is starting to happen. So we are 1 week away from Media Day. We'll be able to really start to dig in to what we're going to see. But we will have one more episode before we get to Media Day. We are going to, because we have to put out our own rankings. We have to do our own things before the conference does. So we've got to do one more so that we can have our own picks out before the conference puts its official picks out. Who's finishing first? Who's player of the year? Who are going to be the award winners in this year's WCC, the final year of Gonzaga, the final year of Oregon State, the final year of Washington State, the first year of Seattle U, and the final year of this 12-team WCC. All right.
Can't wait to get crucified next week. Can't wait.
Be ready. Those Twitter fingers will always be ready. All right. Well, for Thomas, I am Zach. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on wherever you are listening and watching, and then follow along on social media at Posts by Zach, at Thomas Dunn 24, and the unofficial WCC pod. That'll do it. One more quote unquote preview episode left before we head to Las Vegas for Media Day, and we will see all of our friends. We'll be getting the short list together of who we're going to have on the podcast. That will be our first live podcast of the season. So be sure to check us out. The Media Day, I believe, begins at noon on Thursday the 23rd. So we will be able to catch you all there, hopefully live and not recorded, but we'll be also taking questions throughout the course of the live as well. So be sure to pop those in as we're going through the day. All right. One more time. That's Thomas. I'm Zach. We're out of here. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we will catch you later.